The Boeing B-29 Superfortress was not simply an airplane, it was a testament to American industrial might. It represented the largest, most expensive, and most technologically advanced weapon project of World War II, surpassing even the atomic bomb effort in cost. Designed for an oceanic war, the B-29 was capable of flying faster, higher, and carrying a heavier payload farther than any bomber before it. Its pressurized cabins allowed crews to operate at altitudes above 30,000 feet, which was a revolutionary feature for long-duration missions. This incredible ceiling placed the aircraft above the effective range of most Japanese fighter planes and anti-aircraft artillery. The B-29 boasted remote-controlled machine gun turrets, a synchronized firing system that was operated by a central fire control officer. This defensive network made the bomber a formidable, self-protecting fortress in the hostile skies over the Pacific. Its massive wingspan and tricycle landing gear gave the aircraft a distinctive and imposing silhouette on the ground and in the air. The Superfortress was initially intended for the European theater, but the strategic necessity of striking the Japanese homeland made it a unique Pacific asset. Manufacturing the B-29 required building entirely new assembly plants and overcoming immense production difficulties, especially with the temperamental Wright AV-3350 engines. Thousands of engineering changes were introduced during production, transforming the B-29 from a challenging prototype into a devastating operational machine. The sheer scale of the B-29's development signaled to the world that the United States could produce weapons on an unprecedented and terrifying scale. It was conceived as the ultimate strategic weapon, one that could bypass established defenses and deliver the knockout blow directly to the enemy's economic heart. Its arrival marked a new, sobering chapter in aerial warfare, one where geography offered no natural protection from the skies. The Superfortress was a symbol of total war, capable of projecting power across vast distances with merciless efficiency. The B-29's early combat debut in 1944 was met with a mixture of hope from the Allies and disappointment in its immediate results. The first missions, launched from airfields in China as part of Operation Matterhorn, were grueling logistical nightmares. Flying from bases like Chengdu required long, dangerous flights over the Himalayan hump just to bring supplies and fuel to the launching points. The extreme distances limited the bomb load the B-29s could carry, diminishing the strategic impact of each raid. Targeting was difficult due to the B-29's operational altitude. Precision bombing at 30,000 feet proved nearly impossible with the primitive Norden bombsight technology of the time. High-altitude winds over the target areas often scattered bomb patterns widely, missing their intended industrial targets by miles. The reliability of the AV-3350 engines was a persistent and often fatal problem, leading to frequent engine fires and emergency landings. Many Superfortresses were lost not to enemy action, but to mechanical failures or the sheer exhaustion of the long flights. These early raids, aimed at specific factories and military installations, failed to cripple Japan's war production as intended. The Japanese military, having observed the small number of planes and the scattered damage, was quick to dismiss the new bomber. They characterized the B-29's early sorties as minor annoyances, proclaiming that their sophisticated defenses had effectively neutralized the threat. Japanese propaganda outlets mockingly referred to the Superfortress as the big mistake war that paper dragon, suggesting the bomber was more of a technical marvel than an operational success. This initial failure bred a dangerous sense of complacency within the Japanese Home Defense Command. They believed the Americans were committed to high-altitude tactics, a strategy that played directly into the hands of their defensive planning and interception capabilities. This period of early struggle obscured the B-29's true potential and would soon be forgotten in the face of unprecedented devastation. Japan's military and civilian authorities initially held a profoundly dismissive view of the B-29 threat, a confidence rooted in history and immediate observation. For centuries, Japan had been an island nation protected by the vastness of the sea, and direct attacks on the home islands were almost unheard of. The limited success of the early high-altitude raids confirmed their belief that the Superfortress was fundamentally flawed as a strategic weapon. Defense planners had correctly assessed that the B-29's high cruising altitude made accurate visual bombing nearly impossible through Japan's typically cloudy skies. Newspaper headlines and radio broadcasts confidently assured the populace that the high-flying kite was being kept at bay by their valiant pilots and anti-aircraft gunners. This narrative of successful defense was crucial for maintaining civilian morale amidst growing resource scarcity and battlefield defeats. Japanese fighter pilots, flying at their aircraft's ceiling, found the B-29s to be a challenge but believed their interceptors, like the Kawasaki Ki-45, were still a match for the American behemoths. The sheer distance required for the B-29 to fly from China provided further reassurance that the raids could never be sustained at a crippling pace. Japanese engineers and military analysts, while respecting the aircraft's size and range, focused on its mechanical weaknesses, particularly the engine troubles that plagued the early missions. They developed new, specialized high-altitude interceptors, like the Mitsubishi J-2M Raiden, to specifically target the Superfortress, planning to continue the defense at high altitudes. This collective attitude of superiority and dismissal created a strategic blind spot that proved catastrophic later in the war. The belief that the enemy would remain predictable and adhere to the ineffective high-altitude precision strategy was a fatal miscalculation. The Japanese defense apparatus was optimized for fighting a conventional air war, not a war of complete annihilation aimed at their cities. Their hubris and initial successful defense against the high-flying raids allowed them to overlook the immense capacity for tactical change possessed by the American command. This confidence was not malice, it was a deeply ingrained cultural and military conviction that they were prepared for any attack the Americans could throw at them. The entire dynamic of the air war changed drastically with the American capture of the Mariana Islands in mid-1944. Specifically, the islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam offered vast, flat terrain perfectly suited for building the massive airfields required by the B-29. These islands were far closer to Japan's industrial and population centers than the remote bases in China, cutting flight times dramatically. The logistical problems that had plagued Operation Matterhorn simply vanished, replaced by an efficient, American-scale operation. Tens of thousands of U.S. Navy Seabees worked relentlessly to construct multiple 8,500-foot runways, transforming the tropical islands into a strategic air hub. The Marianas became the largest and most concentrated bomber base complex of the entire war, a permanent, self-sufficient unsinkable aircraft carrier. From these bases, the B-29 could reach virtually every major city and industrial center in the Japanese home islands with a full bomb load. The shorter distance meant less fuel was needed, which could then be converted into a significantly increased payload of bombs. This new proximity also allowed for improved rescue operations, better maintenance, and a greater tempo of continuous bombing missions. The 20th Air Force was reorganized, its bombers were concentrated in the Marianas, and the full weight of the Superfortress force was finally brought to bear. The sight of hundreds of B-29s taking off in a constant stream from the 6 major airfields became a terrifying reality for the Japanese radar operators. The shift in geography nullified the defense strategy that had relied on the B-29's logistical struggles. It was no longer a question of if the planes would reach the target, but what they would carry and how they would attack. The Marianas provided the essential platform for General Curtis LeMay to execute the radical change in tactics that would follow. In January 1945, a new figure arrived to take command of the bombing effort, Major General Curtis LeMay, a man known for his bluntness and uncompromising approach. LeMay inherited a mission that was failing to achieve its strategic goals, still committed to the ineffective high-altitude precision bombing. He recognized a critical flaw in the entire campaign. The initial targets were high-altitude bombers, but the actual targets were vulnerable, low-altitude cities. Japanese cities, with their densely packed wooden and paper structures, were not like the stone and concrete cities of Europe. LeMay's intelligence staff confirmed that Japan was a country made of tinder, ripe for catastrophic fire. He immediately ordered the most radical tactical shift of the entire air war, strip the B-29s of their defensive armor and heavy machine guns, and switch from high-explosive bombs to incendiaries. The idea was to lower the B-29s to an altitude of around 5,000 to 8,000 feet, which allowed for maximum payload and maximum targeting accuracy. Flying at a lower altitude meant sacrificing the B-29's primary advantage of height, but it allowed the planes to carry more of the new payload. The removal of defensive armament saved thousands of pounds, which was replaced by thousands of M69 incendiary clusters for each plane. LeMay's command was met with intense skepticism and fear among the flight crews, who suddenly faced enemy fighters at their most vulnerable altitude. The new strategy was a deliberate, calculated risk to trade the lives of the air crews for the certainty of massive, strategic destruction on the ground. LeMay famously told his men that if the strategy failed, he would take the blame, but if it succeeded, the war would end sooner. This shift was a profound moral and operational turning point, moving the campaign from targeting military assets to directly targeting the underlying foundation of the Japanese war effort, its people and their homes. The key to LeMay's new strategy was the M69 incendiary cluster, a weapon meticulously engineered to create a city-destroying firestorm. The M69 was not a single bomb but a cluster of 38 small, hexagonal gelled petrol, napalm, bombs packed inside a single casing. The casing was designed to split open at a predetermined altitude, scattering the individual bomblets across a wide area. Each bomblet, upon impact, would shoot a stream of burning napalm up to 100 feet, scattering the highly flammable jelly. The clusters were dropped in a pre-planned pattern designed to create a single, continuous fire front across the target area. This fire front was intended to heat the air to such a degree that a massive, cyclonic firestorm would be generated. A firestorm is a terrifying phenomenon where massive amounts of hot air rise, drawing in cold air from the periphery at hurricane speeds. These hurricane-force winds carry the flames horizontally, making escape impossible and creating a blast furnace effect. The American targeteer specifically focused on the densely populated urban areas, knowing that Japanese home manufacturing was highly decentralized. Millions of workers were creating war material in small workshops and homes, making the residential districts essential industrial targets. The M69 was effective because Japanese homes were traditionally constructed of wood, paper, and other highly combustible materials. The combination of the M69's chemical design and the target's construction created a weapon of unparalleled destructive efficiency against urban areas. The payload of a single B-29, now unburdened by heavy armor, could effectively incinerate several city blocks in one pass. This new fire weapon transformed the Superfortress from a high-altitude nuisance into an agent of apocalyptic destruction. The night of March 9 to March 10, 1945, is etched into history as the single most destructive air raid in human history. This was the debut of LeMay's new low-altitude, incendiary-only tactics against the massive, crowded city of Tokyo. A total of 334 B-29s, stripped of their guns and flying incredibly low at 5,000 feet, took off from the Marianas for the mission. The first planes dropped high explosive markers to designate the target area, followed immediately by the waves of firebombers. The attack focused on the densely packed, working-class districts of the city, which contained numerous small factories and homes. The Japanese defense was caught completely off guard by the low altitude and the sheer number of aircraft, as well as the new type of weapon. Within minutes of the first incendiary cluster's landing, the inferno began to spread uncontrollably through the wooden city. The firebombing started a blaze so intense that it generated its own weather, creating the predicted, devastating firestorm. Temperatures on the ground reportedly reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt metal and vaporize human bodies. The oxygen was sucked out of the streets and shelters, leading to mass asphyxiation for thousands trapped in concrete bunkers and tunnels. The fierce winds of the firestorm created massive vortices of flame, carrying debris and burning ash high into the night sky. Panic consumed the millions of residents as they struggled to escape the rapidly advancing walls of fire, often jumping into waterways. The Sumida River became clogged with the bodies of those who sought refuge from the flames but drowned or were boiled alive in the superheated water. The raid was a stunning, horrifying success for the American planners and a waking nightmare for the people of Tokyo. The immediate aftermath of the Tokyo fire raid presented a scene of devastation that defied comprehension, a true hell on earth. In approximately 3 hours, 16 square miles of the city were completely annihilated, reduced to smoking ash and rubble. The official Japanese death toll was estimated at over 100,000 people, though historians now believe the figure may be much higher. More people died in the Tokyo fire raid than in the immediate blast of either the Hiroshima or Nagasaki atomic bombs. The dense residential districts, filled with paper and wood, had become a perfect fuel source for the massive, sustained blaze. The heat was so intense that it left behind a landscape of bizarre and terrifying artifacts, like glass bottles melted flat on the street. Survivors described the air as being filled with the smell of burning flesh and the roar of the massive, insatiable fire. The sheer scale of the destruction proved that the Superfortress, in its new tactical role, was the ultimate weapon of urban destruction. The psychological impact on the Japanese leadership and the civilian population was instantaneous and profound. It shattered the belief that the American raids were merely pinpricks and confirmed the terrifying vulnerability of the entire nation. The government struggled to conceal the true extent of the catastrophe, but the smell of smoke and the sight of endless ruins could not be hidden. Tokyo's industrial base was crippled, not by precision bombing, but by the indiscriminate destruction of the homes and small workshops that fed the war machine. The success of the Tokyo raid solidified LeMay's conviction and set the course for the remainder of the air campaign against Japan. The era of high-altitude failure was over, replaced by a ruthless, systematic campaign of urban incineration. Following the successful annihilation of large parts of Tokyo, the firebombing campaign was systematically rolled out across the entire country. LeMay's strategy moved quickly from target to target, aiming to destroy every major urban center and cripple the Japanese war economy completely. Cities like Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and Yokohama were subjected to massive, concentrated incendiary raids in rapid succession. Each city suffered a similar fate. The firestorm effect was repeated, consuming square miles of housing and small industry. Osaka, a major industrial hub, saw over 8 square miles destroyed in a single night of firebombing. The city of Kobe, vital for its shipbuilding facilities, was also devastated, with nearly half its urban area incinerated. The relentless pace of the raids meant that Japanese defense forces were never able to regroup or effectively adapt their countermeasures. As one city was being bombed, the next was already being scouted and planned, offering no respite to the Japanese people. The B-29s flew with impunity, as the Japanese fighter forces and anti-aircraft defenses had been effectively overwhelmed and depleted. The air raids were so frequent that hundreds of thousands of people were forced to flee the cities for the countryside, creating a massive refugee crisis. This displacement further disrupted the remaining industrial output and logistical networks of the Japanese Empire. The campaign created a chilling new reality. Simply living in a major city was a death sentence waiting to be delivered from the sky. By the summer of 1945, virtually every major Japanese city, with the notable exceptions of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Kyoto, and a few others, had been largely reduced to ash. The strategic goal was clear: to demonstrate the utter hopelessness of continuing the war under the weight of this unstoppable aerial terror. The firebombing campaign successfully accomplished its strategic objective of dismantling Japan's ability and will to wage war. Although large, purpose-built factories were often missed by the earlier high-altitude raids, the fire raids destroyed the vital feeder networks. The decentralized nature of Japanese industry, where countless small workshops in homes produced essential components, became its fatal weakness. When the residential districts burned, the entire production chain for aircraft, munitions, and other material collapsed. Raw materials could not reach the assembly plants, and finished goods could not be transported due to the destruction of rail lines and infrastructure. The air raids also directly targeted and destroyed massive oil reserves and distribution centers, paralyzing the remaining military movements. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological impact on the Japanese population was a critical factor in ending the war. The relentless nature of the attacks, coupled with the government's inability to protect its citizens, broke the national will. Civilians who had been told they must fight to the last man were now seeing their homes and families vanish in minutes of fire. The emperor himself toured the devastation in Tokyo and was reportedly moved to tears by the scale of the human suffering. Food rationing, already severe, became catastrophic as the infrastructure for food production and distribution was systematically destroyed. The firebombing campaign showed the Japanese high command that they had no means to prevent the complete annihilation of their homeland. It created a pervasive, inescapable sense of doom that undermined the military's insistence on a prolonged, bloody defense. This comprehensive collapse of the home front made the idea of an honorable final defense, or ketsugo, an impossibility. The success of the firebombing campaign ultimately laid the necessary groundwork for the final, most terrible act of the war. By August 1945, the vast majority of Japan's potential urban targets had already been burned to the ground by incendiary raids. This prior destruction ironically allowed the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to stand out in singular, devastating relief. Had all major cities been equally destroyed by the M69 bombs, the full, shocking impact of the atomic weapon might have been diluted. The B-29 fleet, having mastered the logistics and operation of mass destruction, was the only platform capable of delivering the atomic bombs. The specific aircraft, the Enola Gay and Bockscar, were modified Superfortresses flying out of the familiar airfields on Tinian. The tactical shift to low-altitude firebombing had already acclimatized the Japanese to large-scale, high-casualty air attacks. The atomic bomb was a logical, if terrifyingly absolute, escalation of the total war already being waged by LeMay's bombers. The fire raids had proven that conventional weapons could achieve strategic results nearly as devastating as the atomic bomb. This fact led to internal debate among American leaders about whether the atomic bomb was truly necessary to force a surrender already made inevitable. However, the atomic attacks delivered a psychological blow of a different order, signaling a change not just in quantity of destruction, but in kind. They offered the Japanese government a final, face-saving, and immediate reason to capitulate without the dishonor of a conventional defeat. The B-29, the machine that Japan had initially dismissed, became the messenger of two different, yet equally final, forms of destruction. The firebombing campaign remains one of the most controversial and morally challenging aspects of World War II. The official justification at the time was that the raids hastened the end of the war, thereby saving the lives of potentially millions of Allied and Japanese soldiers in a planned ground invasion. The campaign intentionally blurred the line between military and civilian targets, making the destruction of entire neighborhoods an acceptable strategic goal. In total, over 60 Japanese cities were extensively damaged or largely destroyed by the B-29 fire raids. Estimates of the total death toll from the conventional firebombing campaign are difficult to pin down but certainly exceed 500,000 civilians. Millions more were rendered homeless, creating an enormous humanitarian crisis that lingered long after the surrender. The development of the M69 incendiary and the tactics of the Firestorm represent a cold, calculating engineering of mass death. The strategy proved that technology and ruthless execution could overwhelm an enemy even without the use of nuclear weapons. Modern historians continue to debate the necessity and morality of targeting civilians to this devastating degree. While the B-29 was mocked upon its debut, its ultimate purpose was realized through a tactical shift that resulted in the complete devastation of the home islands. The legacy of the Superfortress is not just a story of engineering success, it is a profound and somber lesson in the extreme costs of total war. The scorched earth of Japan's major cities stands as a permanent memorial to a period when the rules of warfare were irrevocably and terribly rewritten. The silence that followed the final raids was the silence of a nation that had learned the hardest lesson: no people are safe from the consequences of ultimate power projected from the sky.